Finnegan Finn Marlowe never imagined he'd be spending his first day as a teacher, not in some rundown Earth classroom, but deep within the bowels of a hollowed asteroid, trying to teach aliens who seemed about as interested in learning as they were in a human foot fungus. If he'd known this was where his career would take him, he might have reconsidered that degree in intergalactic pedagogy. But there he was, staring into the multicolored eyes of a class full of alien students who looked at him like he was the punchline of some cosmic joke. "So, today we're going to talk about something called critical thinking," Finn said, writing the words on a transparent board that floated in front of the class. "It's this radical concept where you think before you act." Wild, right? A tentacled student whose name Finn had already forgotten raised one appendage lazily. "Why?" it asked, the single syllable dragging out like it was being subjected to merciless torture. "Why?" Finn repeated, tapping the marker against his chin. "Because otherwise, you end up like me, stuck teaching a bunch of disinterested extraterrestrials in a glorified cave." A few of the students blinked in unison, their equivalent of laughter, Finn imagined. He smiled at the thought that at least his self-deprecation had transcended interstellar boundaries. Just then, a loud crash reverberated through the poorly lit corridors outside, causing the entire class to twitch as if someone had turned up the gravity without warning. Finn felt his stomach drop, not that it had much distance to fall in the first place. "Stay here," he instructed, though he doubted any of them would listen. Finn slipped out of the classroom, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. The asteroid's interior was cramped and dim, the walls a patchwork of metal and rock, like someone had tried and failed to decorate using bad taste and spare parts. The sound had come from the direction of the maintenance bay, a section of the asteroid that doubled as a graveyard for malfunctioning tech. He approached cautiously, because while Finn might not have been the brightest bulb in the Terran box, he knew better than to charge headfirst into potential danger. Peeking around the corner, he saw two figures hunched over a console, their faces obscured by helmets that glinted dully in the low light. "Nice work," one of them grunted, voice distorted through the helmet's speaker. "The bosses will love this." Finn knew enough about shady dealings to recognize that anyone referring to the bosses in a place like this was probably up to no good. He made a mental note to brush up on his death wish, since it seemed determined to get him into trouble again. He leaned closer, trying to catch a glimpse of what they were doing. The pair of them seemed to be tinkering with a set of cables, rerouting power from the main grid, because nothing says welcome to your new job like a bunch of mercenaries planning God knows what in your new backyard. Finn backed away slowly, deciding that confronting two armed individuals on his first day might not be the best career move. Better to leave that for day 2 or 3, when he'd really lost his mind. Back in the classroom, the students were as he'd left them, which is to say, completely uninterested in anything that didn't involve their own species' apparently infinite tolerance for apathy. Finn cleared his throat loudly, only to be ignored once more. "All right," he announced, forcing a smile. "How about a little practical exercise? Let's say you're a group of mercenaries looking to exploit an asteroid's resources." "What would you do?" A sleepy-eyed alien with chartreuse skin stirred in its seat. "Why would we care?" it asked. "We're just here because our learning quotas demanded it," Finn sighed. "Right, quotas. Well, let's pretend for a moment that you actually want to know." That almost got a reaction. Almost. "You could start by sabotaging the energy supply," Finn said, pacing back and forth. "Or you could try rerouting power to another part of the asteroid, like, I don't know, the maintenance bay." A few heads turned, curiosity piqued if only for a moment. Finn felt a surge of triumph, though he knew better than to get too carried away. "Of course," he continued, "that kind of thing is dangerous. You'd need backup, maybe a teacher with nothing to lose." A ripple of amusement passed through the class. That was something, at least. Finn knew the real problem wasn't the students' indifference, but the underlying tension that buzzed throughout the asteroid like a bad hangover. The truth was, there was more to this rock than met the eye. The asteroid's subterranean levels were a labyrinth of forgotten technology and abandoned dreams, a perfect playground for anyone looking to exploit its secrets. And Finn, with his penchant for trouble, was starting to wonder if he'd been dropped into the middle of something much bigger than a simple teaching gig. As the class ended and the students filed out, Finn knew that his first day was just the beginning of a long, complicated mess. He couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. A human teacher, an alien school, and a plot thickening faster than instant pudding. When the classroom was empty, Finn leaned back in his chair, the creaking sound echoing ominously. He knew he should be worried about the mercenaries, the disinterested students, and the fact that he was in way over his head. Instead, he found himself grinning because really, what else could he do? That's when the lights flickered, and in the brief darkness, Finn heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. Heavy, deliberate steps, the kind that suggested someone was bringing bad news. A tall figure appeared at the door, silhouetted against the flickering lights. Finn recognized the shape immediately, one of the mercenaries from the maintenance bay. The figure stepped inside, helmet off now, revealing a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by someone with a grudge against smooth edges. The mercenary smiled, an unsettling expression. "Finn, right. That's me," Finn replied, leaning back as if he hadn't a care in the world. "And you are," the mercenary shrugged. "Call me Dax." "All right, Dax, what can I do for you?" Dax's eyes, dark and calculating, scanned the room before fixing on Finn. "We need someone with your talents." "Is that a compliment?" Finn asked, eyebrows raised. "Take it how you like," Dax replied. "We could use someone who thinks on their feet, or at least pretends to." Finn considered his options, which were approximately zero as far as he could tell. "What's in it for me?" Dax laughed, a sound that could curdle milk. "Besides not finding yourself on the wrong end of a blaster." "Well, when you put it like that," Finn said, feigning reluctance, "I suppose I could be convinced." "Good. You might find this asteroid more interesting than you think," Dax said, turning to leave. "We'll be in touch." With that, the mercenary disappeared, leaving Finn alone with his thoughts, which were mostly centered around how quickly he could find a way off this rock before things got worse. But as he sat there, contemplating his rapidly deteriorating life choices, Finn realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a part of him that wanted to see where this would all go. After all, he'd never been one to back down from a challenge, even when common sense screamed otherwise. So he leaned back once more, letting the chair creak ominously beneath him, and waited for the next chapter of this absurd adventure to unfold. Because if there was one thing Finn Marlowe had learned in his short, chaotic life, it was that sometimes the best thing you could do was sit back, enjoy the ride, and hope like hell you didn't crash and burn. Finn sat at his makeshift teacher's desk, surrounded by the kind of silence that only an asteroid full of disinterested alien students could provide. He tapped a finger rhythmically on the transparent board, hoping to drum up some inspiration or divine intervention, whichever came first. His first day hadn't gone exactly as planned, but then again, what plan included mercenaries, apathy incarnate students, and a teaching gig in a glorified space cave? The next day, he decided that if he was going to be stuck in this rock with a bunch of aliens who couldn't care less, he might as well have a little fun. After all, nobody ever said you couldn't enjoy a good catastrophe. "All right, settle down," Finn said, using his best authoritative tone, which was about as effective as a chocolate teapot. "Today we're gonna do something a little different. It's called unlearning." The aliens looked at him, their faces, or closest approximation thereof, etched with perfect apathy. "Unlearning is where you take something you know and question why you know it," Finn explained, pacing slowly like he imagined an eccentric professor might. "For example, why do we have to follow orders? Because we get in trouble if we don't," muttered a student with skin the color of a morning hangover. "True," Finn conceded, "but what if trouble is just another word for opportunity?" Most of them blinked, or did their equivalent of it. For the first time, Finn thought he saw a glimmer of something that might vaguely resemble curiosity. It was faint and would probably vanish if you sneezed, but it was there. Let's say there's a group of people who want you to do something, Finn continued, leaning on the desk with all the casualness of a cat burglar at a police convention. They say, hey, do this or else. Why just take their word for it? A tentacled student, intrigued despite itself, raised an appendage. What would happen if we didn't follow orders? Well, Finn said, shrugging, maybe nothing, maybe something. Perhaps you find out who's really in charge, or at least give them a headache in the process. There was a pause, like they'd all collectively decided to give critical thinking a test drive. Finn started to pace again, hoping the movement might spark some life into the conversation, or at least keep him from falling asleep standing. Meanwhile, the asteroid's corridors were becoming a playground for Captain Virax and his merry band of mercenaries. Finn hadn't seen Virax yet, but he assumed the guy was the kind of leader who wore enigmatic like a cheap cologne. The mercenaries were quietly and efficiently taking over the infrastructure, inch by unnoticed inch, which, in a place this neglected, wasn't exactly difficult. The authorities, if you could call the patchwork group of overworked and underpaid officials authorities, were about as vigilant as a sloth after a heavy meal. In the classroom, Finn decided to push his luck. Let's talk about rebellion. That got a few more heads to turn. Rebellion, Finn continued, isn't about chaos for chaos's sake. It's about questioning the status quo. Like asking why you're sitting here listening to me and not out there, finding out what those mercenaries are up to. The sleepy-eyed chartreuse student raised what passed for an eyebrow in its species. You think we should rebel? Not exactly, Finn said. I think you should think. I know, radical, right? A faint murmur passed through the room. Like the distant rumble of a storm you hoped wouldn't hit your house but kind of wanted to see because, well, storms are cool. Over in the maintenance bay, the mercenary operation was picking up steam. They'd rerouted power, bypassed controls, and generally made a mockery of the asteroid's already lackluster security. If anyone had cared enough to look, they might have seen the signs. A flickering light here, a humming console there. But since when did people notice the little things? Finn's lessons, if you could call them that, were starting to have an unexpected impact. A few students began to ask questions, mostly about the mercenaries, but Finn counted that as a victory. Tentative, shaky curiosity was better than none at all. One of the more vocal students, a rather prickly creature with a penchant for asking uncomfortable questions, finally spoke up. What if those mercenaries are planning something bad? Finn smiled. Then it might be a good idea to find out before bad becomes worse. But we're just students, the student countered, skepticism dripping from every word. Everyone's just something until they're not, Finn replied. And sometimes the less you are, the more dangerous you can be. Back in Virax's hideout, or what passed for one in this jury-rigged asteroid, they were fine-tuning their plans. Delicate operations like these required a deft touch, the kind that involved less brute force and more sleight of hand. Virax, unseen yet omnipresent, was orchestrating his crew with the precision of a maestro conducting a symphony of disaster. The students, meanwhile, were starting to think outside the proverbial box. They'd begun to whisper among themselves, exchanging ideas and plans, some crazy enough to think they might actually make a difference. Finn watched this development with a mix of pride and trepidation. On the one hand, it was great to see them engaged. On the other, if they got too involved, it could get messy. But he knew they needed this, needed to feel like they were more than a number on a class register or a quota to be filled. So, Finn said, drawing their attention back, what do we do about it? Sabotage, suggested a voice from the back, its tone innocent enough to make the suggestion almost palatable. Maybe, Finn replied, resisting the urge to laugh, or maybe something a bit less. Permanent? Like what? The chartreuse-skinned student asked, genuinely curious for once. Finn shrugged, enjoying the attention. Like observation, information is power after all. If you know what they're doing, you might be able to stop it or at least alert someone who can. The idea was simple, almost laughably so, but it was a start, and in a place where no one knew or cared what was going on, it might be enough. The class ended, and Finn watched as the students filed out, some animated, some still apathetic, but all of them at least partially awake now. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied that for once he might have actually taught them something useful. The lights flickered again, a reminder that in this place nothing was stable. Finn wondered how long before things really started to unravel, and whether his students would be ready when it did. Later, in the dim corridors of the asteroid, Finn found himself wandering aimlessly, thoughts swirling like the smoke from a burning bridge. Dax had been true to his word, or threat, and Finn had a feeling he'd be hearing from the mercenaries soon. But for now, he had a little time to kill before they inevitably dragged him into whatever mess they were planning. As he walked, Finn couldn't help but feel a strange sense of camaraderie with his apathetic students. They were all stuck here, in this forgotten corner of the galaxy, trying to make sense of an existence that seemed hell-bent on making no sense at all. His musings were interrupted by the sound of voices. Familiar ones. He followed them stealthily, well, as stealthy as a human could be in an eco-friendly asteroid, and found himself at the edge of an open room filled with the unmistakable hum of machinery. Inside, some of his more curious students were gathered, clustered around a console. The Chartreuse student seemed to be leading the charge, its eyes fixed on the screen, data flashing by like the world's least entertaining slideshow. "What are you all doing here?" Finn asked, making them jump like he just announced a surprise exam. "We're observing," Chartreuse said, trying to sound innocent but failing spectacularly. Finn chuckled despite himself. "Really? And what have you observed?" "That whatever these mercenaries are doing, it's big," another student piped up, "and they're close to finishing it." "Interesting," Finn said, nodding. "And what's your plan?" The students exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Chartreuse stepped forward. "We were thinking we could, delay them." "Delay them how?" Finn asked, intrigued. "By messing with their systems," the student said, pointing to the console with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Just enough to buy some time." Finn considered this. It was risky, sure, but it was also kind of brilliant in its simplicity. And if there was one thing he'd learned, it was that sometimes the simplest solutions were the best. "All right," Finn said finally, crossing his arms. "Let's see what you've got." They got to work, fingers, tentacles, whatever flying over the console. Finn leaned against the wall, watching them with a mixture of pride and dread. He knew they were playing a dangerous game, but it was their game now, and he wasn't about to stop them. Not when they'd finally found something worth caring about. Time slipped by, a silent accomplice, until finally the students stepped back, looking pleased with themselves. "Okay," Chartreuse said, "we did it. Now what?" Finn looked at them, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Now we wait and see what happens next." The asteroid hummed around them, a living, breathing entity, harboring secrets and stories in its cold, unfeeling heart. Finn knew they were just one part of a much bigger story, a tale of rebellion and consequence. But for now, it was enough to be part of something, to feel like they mattered. And as they waited, adrenaline coursing through them like a wild, untamed river, Finn couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, things were about to get interesting. The classroom was buzzing like a hive of caffeinated bees, which, if you asked Finn, was a vast improvement over its usual vibe of a cemetery at midnight. The students, emboldened by their recent foray into subterfuge, were asking questions with the reckless abandon of a toddler who's just discovered the word why. Finn leaned against the transparent board, arms crossed, watching them with a combination of pride and dread. They reminded him of himself at their age, full of questions, full of energy, and full of what his parents used to call damned foolishness. One student, a scaly creature with a face that looked like a failed attempt at origami, raised a hand. "Why do we follow the rules if they're just there to control us?" Finn scratched his chin, pretending to think deeply, though his mind was more preoccupied with the fact that his shoes were sticking to the floor. Space janitors weren't exactly up to snuff on this rock. Good question, he said. Sometimes rules are there to keep us safe. Sometimes they're there because some bureaucrat needed to justify their paycheck. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and Finn felt like he just delivered a keynote speech at a conference on common sense. But what about the mercenaries? Piped up another student, its voice a raspy whisper like sandpaper on a chalkboard. Are they following some kind of rule, or are they just here to make trouble? Both, Finn replied, shrugging. They're following their own rules, which is usually a mix of guns, guts, and a general disregard for anyone standing in their way. The students nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation, though Finn wasn't quite sure what to make of their newfound interest in anarchy. He just hoped they were more interested in the concept than the practice. Meanwhile, in the shadowy corridors of the asteroid, Captain Virax was licking his metaphorical chops. Finn hadn't met the guy yet, but he'd heard enough about him to imagine that Virax was the sort who thought subtlety was a kind of cologne you wore to a funeral. The mercenaries had spotted the uptick in student activities and saw a golden opportunity to sow chaos, while everyone was too busy playing detective. Virax leaned over a console, watching the data stream in with the kind of glee usually reserved for children unwrapping presents. "Looks like our little friends are getting restless," he said, his voice smooth and oily like a salesman with a trunk full of defective merchandise. One of his lieutenants, a grizzled veteran with a face like a relief map of regret, nodded. "They're poking around more than usual. Might be time to give them something to chew on." "Exactly," Virax replied, grinning like a shark at a buffet. "Let's feed them just enough rope to hang themselves with." Back in the classroom, Finn was starting to see the consequences of his teachings unfold. The students began to question everything, from the quality of the food rations to the integrity of the ceiling tiles. It was chaos, and Finn couldn't help but feel a little like a proud parent watching his child take its first steps, right off a cliff. Finn decided to stoke the fire a bit more. "Think about it," he said, tapping the transparent board with a knuckle. "If the mercenaries are here to mess things up, then maybe it's because they see an opportunity where we see a problem." "Opportunity?" Chartreuse asked, brow furrowed in what Finn secretly hoped was deep thought. "Sure," Finn replied, nodding sagely. "Opportunity to exploit a situation to take advantage of the chaos. The trick is not to get caught up in it." "But how?" another student challenged, skepticism etched into every alien feature. "By paying attention," Finn said, shrugging. "By questioning why things are happening and who benefits from them." The students exchanged glances, and Finn could almost see the gears turning in their heads. He hoped they were thinking about ways to outsmart the mercenaries, not just how to get out of class early. Meanwhile, Virax's mercenaries were busy putting their plan into motion. They took advantage of the unrest, slipping whispers into the right ears, setting up patzes, and generally making life difficult for anyone who was too slow to dodge the inevitable fallout. In the maintenance bay, a console began to flash an angry red warning, lights dancing like a disco from hell. A security officer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere but there squinted at the screen. "What the problem?" asked a mercenary, leaning casually against a support beam, arms crossed like he was waiting for a bus. "Looks like a security breach," the officer muttered, jabbing at buttons with all the grace of a gorilla playing the piano. "Doesn't seem serious," the mercenary suggested, flashing a reassuring smile that did anything but reassure. "Yeah, you're probably right," the officer agreed, the kind of guy who would believe the sun was a myth if you told him convincingly enough. Outside the maintenance bay, a few students watched the display with a mix of awe and horror. They hadn't expected their little delay plan to work quite so effectively. It was one thing to talk about subterfuge. It was another to see it unfold in real time. "Think we overdid it?" Chartreuse asked, eyes wide. "A bit," Finn admitted, though secretly he was impressed. "But maybe that's not a bad thing." "Why not?" another student asked, skepticism now a permanent fixture in their voice. Because sometimes a little chaos is just what you need to shake things up, Finn replied, wishing he could believe his own words. In the command center, Virax watched the chaos unfold on his screens, a satisfied smirk playing across his lips. Things were going exactly as planned. The students' meddling had drawn attention away from the real game, allowing his team to move undetected, like ghosts through a graveyard. Back in the classroom, the bell rang, signaling the end of another lesson. The students gathered their things, buzzing with a nervous energy Finn hadn't seen since his own first day at university. They were excited, curious, and just a little bit scared, a dangerous combination, but also a promising one. Finn watched them file out, feeling a pang of guilt mixed with pride. He knew they were in over their heads, that their curiosity could get them into trouble, but he also knew that trouble was sometimes the best teacher. As he gathered his own things, Finn noticed a small piece of paper left on his desk, a message scrawled in a hurry. He unfolded it, the words making his heart skip a beat. "We know what you're doing, keep it up." No signature, no hint of who it might be from. Just those words, a promise, a threat, or maybe a bit of both. Finn didn't know, and that was the most terrifying part of all. Virax watched his mercenaries move with practiced precision, each step calculated, each action deliberate. They were hunting for something, though Finn couldn't quite piece together what it was. But the students' disruption had offered them cover, a perfect smokescreen. In the shadows, Finn contemplated his next move. He'd unleashed something he wasn't entirely sure he could control. The students were engaged, sure, but what if their curiosity led them into the kind of trouble that couldn't be written off as a youthful indiscretion? And what if the mercenaries' real goal was something worse than they dared to imagine? He needed a plan, and fast. But planning wasn't exactly Finn's strong suit. He was more of a wing it and hope for the best kind of guy. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were coming to a head, that the chaos was building to a crescendo that could end with a bang or a whimper. The students, meanwhile, were restless. They tasted something they couldn't quite define, and it left them hungering for more. Questions buzzed around their minds like persistent gnats, and they sought out Finn, peppering him with queries he couldn't always answer, nor was he sure he should. "Finn," Chartreuse said, cornering him in the hallway, "what if we've started something we can't stop?" Finn looked at the student, trying to muster the right words. "Then we make sure whatever we've started is worth finishing," he said, hoping it sounded more profound than it actually was. "But what if it's too late?" another student asked, joining the impromptu conference. "Then we adapt," Finn replied, trying to sound confident. "Remember, we're all just figuring this out as we go." In the command center, Virax was busy orchestrating his own symphony of disaster, one that relied heavily on the students' unintentional sabotage to keep the authorities stumbling in the dark. As long as everyone was too busy dealing with small fires, they'd miss the inferno that was about to consume them all. Finn was beginning to realize that teaching rebellion, even in small doses, was like trying to contain a wildfire with a garden hose. The students were burning with curiosity, with a desire to understand, to change, to act, and there was no going back now. The asteroid continued its silent orbit, an unfeeling observer in the grand scheme of things. Its corridors, dim and cramped, echoed with the footsteps of those trying to make their mark on the universe, no matter how small or insignificant. As Finn walked through those corridors, he couldn't help but feel like he was part of something bigger, a story that was still unfolding, full of mystery and danger. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, and for the first time in a long time, Finn felt truly alive. He just hoped he could keep it that way. In the end, maybe that was the real lesson, that life was chaos, unpredictable and uncontrollable. But amidst that chaos, there was opportunity. Opportunity to learn, to grow, and maybe, just maybe, to survive. The students might not have known it yet, but they were on the brink of something big, something that could change everything. And Finn, for better or worse, was right there with them, ready to see where the chaos would lead. Because in the end, wasn't that what life was all about? Finn found himself standing before a panel of bureaucrats who looked like they had been assembled from the remnants of old office furniture. Their faces were carved into perpetual scowls, and their eyes gleamed with the kind of malice only government officials could muster after a complaint form got misfiled. "Mr. Marlowe," said the head bureaucrat, a man with a necktie so tight it seemed to be choking life out of him, "it appears your educational methods have sparked a significant amount of unrest." Finn couldn't help but chuckle, though it came out more like a choke. "Really? I thought they were just getting into the spirit of questioning authority. Isn't that what education is about? If by education you mean sowing chaos and dissent, then yes, you're excelling," Necktie Man replied, deadpan enough to make a robot envious. Finn shrugged, a practiced motion that could mean anything from "I don't care" to "I really screwed up, didn't I?" He decided to double down. "Well, you know what they say, chaos is just opportunity in disguise." "Opportunity for what exactly?" "Arson." Another official chimed in, her hair pulled into a bun so severe it could be classified as a weapon. "Or maybe anarchy," added a third, who might have been a shadow or just really good at blending into the grime of the asteroid's interior. Just as Finn was about to attempt a witty retort, something along the lines of comparing his students to misunderstood artists, or maybe even feckless politicians, an alarm rang out. The kind of alarm that suggested something more serious than a fire drill, more like a "we're all going to die" drill. "What's that for?" Finn asked, though he already had a sinking suspicion. "Security breach," said a voice over the intercom that crackled like it had been smoking for 50 years. "All units report to intercept." The bureaucrats immediately began scrambling like headless chickens, each trying to look busy and important without actually doing anything productive. Finn used the opportunity to slip out, feeling like a kid sneaking out of detention. Back in the classroom, or what used to be a classroom but was now more of a war room, Finn found his students huddled around the transparent board, which was now covered in doodles that might have been tactical plans or just evidence of a sugar rush. "All right, listen up," Finn clapped his hands together. "We're in deep trouble here. The authorities think we're the ringleaders of this little revolution." "Are we?" asked one of the students, an alien with skin the color of a bad sunburn. "Only if we get caught," Finn replied with a wink. "Now, any brilliant ideas on how we avoid that?" Chartreuse, who had become something of a spokesperson for the group, stepped forward. "We got word the mercenaries are planning something big, a heist of some kind. They're using our chaos as cover." "Ah, so we're the distraction," Finn said, nodding. "Great, just what I always wanted to be." "So what do we do?" asked another student, the worry in their voice barely masked by bravado. Finn scratched at his beard, buying time. "Simple," he said finally. "We make things even more chaotic. If the mercenaries want a cover, let's give them the biggest smoke screen they've ever seen." The students exchanged glances, a mixture of excitement and fear dancing in their eyes. "That sounds dangerous," Chartreuse said, hesitating. "Life's dangerous," Finn replied, with the kind of fatalistic shrug that might have been borrowed from an old noir film. "And besides, it beats sitting on our hands and waiting to see how this all blows over." Outside, the asteroid was alive with activity. Mercenaries moved with precision, slinking through the shadows like predatory cats, their eyes fixed on their targets. The students, armed with little more than their wits and a questionable sense of invincibility, set to work creating diversions. Misdirection had always been their strong suit. Now it was their only suit. Finn led a group through the dimly lit corridors, the ceiling hanging so low it felt like a conspiracy against tall people. Their footsteps echoed ominously, as if the asteroid itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "Where are we going?" asked a student who had eyes that glowed faintly in the dark, a useful trait Finn mused when you're trying not to trip over your own feet. "To the maintenance bay," Finn said, his voice low. "We need to sabotage the main security systems. That way the mercenaries won't know we're onto them." "How do you know that?" the student asked, suspicion lacing their voice like barbed wire. I don't, Finn admitted. But it sounds like a decent plan, doesn't it? They reached the maintenance bay without incident, which was both a relief and mildly terrifying. If there were no guards, it meant either they were doing something right or something was about to go very, very wrong. All right, Finn whispered. Let's get to work. The students set about hacking into the systems, their fingers flying over the consoles with a speed that spoke of late-night video game marathons and far too much caffeine. Finn couldn't help but feel a swell of pride, quickly followed by a twinge of fear, pride for their skills, fear for what those skills could unleash. Meanwhile, Captain Virax watched the chaos unfold with the detached amusement of a man watching a particularly entertaining puppet show. His mercenaries had infiltrated the storage facilities, the very heart of the asteroid's operation, without so much as a hitch. The student's distractions were a perfect smokescreen, allowing his crew to work unimpeded. Everything's going according to plan, Virax muttered to himself, his lips curling into a predatory grin. Almost too easy. In the maintenance bay, a sudden explosion rocked the asteroid, the floor shuddering beneath their feet like an angry beast. The students exchanged panicked glances, and Finn felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. What was that? Chartreuse shouted over the din, their voice barely audible over the alarms that wailed like banshees. Looks like our friends just set off some fireworks, Finn replied, his voice grim. We need to move. Now. The group bolted, sprinting through the corridors with a newfound urgency. Finn could hear his heart pounding in his ears, a relentless drumbeat propelling him forward. The students followed, their footsteps echoing like thunder in the confined space. They reached the docking bay, Finn's lungs burning with each ragged breath. The students looked to him, their expressions a mix of fear and expectation. What's the plan? Chartreuse asked, their voice steady despite the chaos. Finn paused, wiping sweat from his brow. We need to get off this rock, he said finally. Find a way to regroup, figure out our next move. And how do you suggest we do that? Finn gestured to a small shuttle, its hull battered but serviceable. That'll do. The students didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled aboard, Finn bringing up the rear, casting a last glance over his shoulder at the asteroid. It had been their home, their battlefield, and now it was a death trap they needed to escape. The shuttle's engines roared to life, the vibrations thrumming through the cabin like the heartbeat of some great beast. Finn took the controls, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Hold on, he said, more to himself than to the students. This is going to be bumpy. The shuttle lurched forward, cutting through the ether like a knife through butter. Finn could feel the inertia pressing against him, the weight of their escape tangible in the pit of his stomach. Behind them, the asteroid shrank into the distance, a memory growing fainter with each passing second. Finn's grip on the controls tightened, his focus narrowing to the task at hand. They were safe for now, but Finn knew the reprieve was only temporary. The mercenaries were still out there, lurking like wolves in the night, ready to pounce at the first sign of weakness. As the stars stretched out before them, Finn allowed himself a single, fleeting moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to turn the tide, to take control of their own destiny. But for now, survival would have to do. He glanced at the students, their faces illuminated by the dim glow of the shuttle's cockpit. They were scared, yes, but there was something else there too, determination, a spark that hadn't been there before. Finn forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. Buckle up, kids, he said, his voice carrying a note of forced cheer. This ride's just getting started. The students exchanged nervous glances, but there was a glimmer of resolve in their eyes that gave Finn a sliver of hope. After all, in the grand tapestry of the universe, sometimes the threads you least expect are the ones that hold everything together. And maybe, just maybe, they could weave something new from the chaos they'd created. As the shuttle hurtled through the void, Finn couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning? Time would tell, but for now they had each other. And in a universe as vast and unforgiving as theirs, that would have to be enough. Finn Marlowe had always thought of himself as an accidental anarchist. He'd never set out to throw a wrench into the finely tuned clockwork of authority. But here he was, piloting a battered shuttle with a group of wide-eyed alien students who looked at him like he was either their savior or an idiot. Maybe both. The view from the cockpit was nothing to write home about, unless you liked writing about the vast, empty void of space punctuated by the occasional asteroid or mercenary ship, in which case you were in luck. Finn swore he could feel Captain Virax's mercenaries breathing down their necks, even from across the abyss. "Hey, Finn," Chartreuse asked, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife through an overcooked steak. "What's the plan when they catch us?" "Catch us," Finn replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "They're not going to catch us. I've got a trick or two up my sleeve." "Like what?" Another student piped up, skepticism dripping from every syllable, waving a white flag and asking for a timeout. "Very funny," Finn quipped, "but I've got something a bit more creative in mind. First, we need to lose them." The shuttle shuddered as Finn pulled a maneuver that could generously be described as ambitious and more accurately as suicidal. The students held on for dear life as the shuttle veered sharply, the gravitational forces waging war with their stomachs. "Ever done this before?" Chartreuse asked, her voice strained. "Only in simulations," Finn admitted. "And once in a dream where I forgot to put on pants." The mercenary ships followed, relentless as tax collectors at the end of the fiscal year. Finn's mind raced, trying to calculate the odds, which felt increasingly like betting on the wrong horse at a glue factory. "I told you he was an idiot," one of the students muttered, just loud enough for Finn to hear. "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Finn shot back. "Remind me to write you a glowing recommendation letter." The shuttle bucked again, and Finn's fingers danced over the controls like a pianist trying to ring a tune out of a broken keyboard. He could almost hear Captain Virax cackling in the distance, savoring the spectacle of Finn's impromptu aerobatics. "Okay," Finn said, "new plan. We find a nice, quiet asteroid to lay low on. Preferably one without a welcome mercenary sign." "And how do we pick the right one?" Chartreuse asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and resignation. "Easy," Finn replied. "We go for the one that's least likely to explode under us. It's a low bar, but I like to keep my standards reasonable." The students exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them like a game of interstellar charades. Despite the odds, there was a spark of something that might have been hope or sheer, reckless optimism in their eyes. Finn pushed the shuttle to its limits, weaving between asteroids like a drunk trying to navigate their way home after last call. Behind them, the mercenaries kept up the chase, their ships as tenacious as barnacles on a rusty hull. "Remember," Finn called out, "they think we're the distraction, not the main event." "Let's make sure they keep thinking that." "How do we do that?" Chartreuse asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. "By being as annoying as possible," Finn replied with a grin that bordered on maniacal. "It's a talent I've honed over years of dealing with school bureaucrats." The students laughed, a nervous, jittery sound that spoke volumes about their state of mind, and Finn felt a flicker of camaraderie. They were in this together, for better or worse. The asteroid they finally chose wasn't much to look at, just a hunk of rock with a few promising craters that might provide some cover. Finn guided the shuttle down with all the finesse of a first-time driver parking a spaceship. "Welcome to scenic nowhere," Finn announced as the shuttle touched down with a jolt that rattled every loose bolt. "Population us." The students disembarked, their expressions a mix of relief and disbelief. The asteroid was as desolate as a bureaucrat's soul, but for the moment it was theirs. "Okay," Finn said, clapping his hands together in an attempt to rally the troops. "First things first, we set up a perimeter, make sure we're not about to be overrun by mercenaries or ambushed by whatever else might be lurking out there." "And then?" Chartreuse asked, her tone implying she was bracing for another dubious suggestion. And then we figure out how to turn this mess into our advantage, Finn replied, his mind already spinning with possibilities. Remember, chaos is just opportunity in disguise. Sounds like a load of crap, one of the students muttered, though their words were tinged with reluctant admiration. Maybe, Finn conceded, but it's all we've got right now, so let's get to work. The students spread out, their movements cautious but determined. Finn watched them, a part of him amazed at how quickly they'd adapted to their new reality. They were scrappy, resourceful, everything the mercenaries weren't expecting. Finn's thoughts drifted back to Captain Virax, the shadowy puppet master pulling strings from who knew where. The mercenaries were a well-oiled machine, precise and efficient, while Finn and his students were more like a collection of misfit toys cobbled together by circumstance. But sometimes, Finn mused, it's the misfits who surprise you the most. As they worked, Finn couldn't help but wonder how it had come to this. What had started as an attempt to teach his students to question authority had snowballed into a full-blown insurrection, with him at the helm of a sinking ship. Finn, Chartreuse's voice pulled him from his reverie. We've got company. Finn followed her gaze to the horizon, where a small squadron of mercenary ships loomed like a storm front. They'd found them, and this time there would be no easy escape. Well, crap, Finn muttered, his heart sinking. Looks like we're about to have one hell of a parent-teacher conference. The students regrouped, their expressions a mix of fear and defiance. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and the odds of survival were slimmer than a starving spider. All right, listen up, Finn said, his voice carrying a note of grim determination. We might not be able to win this fight, but we can damn well make it the fight of their lives. And how do you propose we do that? Chartreuse asked, her eyes wide with unspoken questions. By being unpredictable, Finn replied. By using every dirty trick in the book and then some. Remember, they're not expecting us to fight back. The students nodded, their resolve hardening like steel in a forge. If this was to be their last stand, they'd make sure it was one for the history books, or at least the footnotes. The mercenaries advanced, their ships a menacing wall of metal and malice. Finn's mind raced, searching for any advantage, any weak spot they could exploit. He turned to the students, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Anyone remember how to rewire a comm system for broadcast? Chartreuse grinned, the spark of an idea catching fire in her eyes. I think we can manage that. Together, they set to work, fingers flying over the controls with a mix of desperation and determination. The plan was crazy, borderline suicidal, but it was the only shot they had. As the mercenaries closed in, Finn took a deep breath, the weight of leadership pressing down on him like a leaden shroud. All right, kids, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Let's show them what a real distraction looks like. The comm system crackled to life, Finn's voice echoing across the asteroid with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Attention, Captain Virax, he announced, his tone dripping with irreverence. This is Finn Marlowe, teacher extraordinaire, and if you're hearing this, congratulations. You've just won a front row seat to the galactic premiere of Screw the Rules, an interstellar adventure. The mercenaries paused, a ripple of confusion passing through their ranks like a shockwave. Finn smirked, feeling the adrenaline surge through his veins. We may be outnumbered, he continued, but that doesn't mean we can't give you a run for your credits. So buckle up, Buttercup, because this ride's about to get bumpy. The students took their positions, a ragtag army of misfits united by circumstance and defiance. Finn's heart swelled with pride despite the odds stacked against them. The first wave of mercenaries hit like a tidal surge, their precision a stark contrast to the students' scrappy resilience. But Finn and his ragtag crew fought back with a tenacity that caught even the seasoned mercenaries off guard. With each passing moment, Finn felt the tide turning, not in their favor, but in a way that suggested maybe, just maybe, they'd leave a dent in the mercenaries' well-oiled machine. And in that moment, amidst the chaos and the cacophony, Finn realized something. They might not win, they might not even survive, but they were doing something far more important. They were making the mercenaries work for it. As the asteroid echoed with the sounds of battle, Finn couldn't help but laugh, a sound born of desperation, defiance, and the sheer absurdity of their situation. Life's a funny thing, he mused aloud, his voice nearly lost in the fray. You spend it trying to teach kids to think for themselves, and then one day you find yourself leading them into battle against mercenaries. Sounds like a hell of a lesson plan, Chartreuse quipped, her eyes shining with the fire of defiance. Yeah, Finn agreed, his grin as grim as it was genuine. Here's hoping we all get enough for effort. As the battle raged on, Finn and his students fought with everything they had, their resolve burning brighter than any star. And though the outcome was uncertain, one thing was clear. They'd face whatever came next together, united in their defiance and their determination to survive. Because in the end, sometimes all you've got is each other, and sometimes that's enough. Finn leaned against a jagged rock, trying to catch his breath while keeping one eye on the students and the other on the horizon, where the mercenaries were regrouping. They'd given the hired guns a bloody nose, but the bastards would be back and itching for payback. Finn, you look like you've been dragged through a black hole backwards, Chartreuse remarked, her expression a mix of amusement and concern. Thanks, kid, Finn replied, swiping a hand across his sweat-streaked forehead. Just what I need, fashion advice on a battlefield. Next, you'll tell me my shoes don't match my laser burns. Chartreuse chuckled, shaking her head. What now, O fearless leader? Finn sighed, glancing at the makeshift barricade they'd set up using scrap metal and sheer desperation. Now we convince the rest of the city that joining a bunch of misfit students and a washed-up teacher is the best idea since gravity. But how? Another student piped up, eyes wide with the kind of doubt only teenagers can muster. With style, panache, and a complete disregard for personal safety, Finn replied, deadpan. But mostly we cheat. That earned him a few nervous laughs, but the tension in the air was thicker than a bureaucrat's skull. Just then, a series of beeps from the comm system interrupted Finn's thoughts. The signal was patchy, like a drunk trying to sing karaoke, but it was there. Finn's heart skipped a beat, an incoming transmission and not the kind that screamed surrender or die. Everyone, shut up for a sec, Finn said, shushing the group as he fiddled with the dials. Static hissed and crackled before a familiar voice, smooth as a smug politician, slipped through. Finn Marlowe, you magnificent bastard, the voice drawled. I should have known you'd be at the center of this cluster. Zed, Finn interrupted, grinning like he'd just found a beer in the desert. The one and only, Zed replied, his voice a syrupy drawl over the comms. Got your distress signal. Figured I'd swing by and see if you needed a hand or just a good slap upside the head. Zed, an old friend from Finn's wilder days, had a knack for showing up just when things were about to go from bad to catastrophic. His timing was impeccable in the way an impending asteroid collision is punctual. Need both, as a matter of fact, Finn replied, his spirits lifting despite the odds. Think you can provide backup, or are you just here to heckle from the sidelines? Got a few friends with me, Zed said, a hint of mischief in his voice. Let's just say they're not too fond of mercenaries or authority figures or hygiene. Finn laughed, the sound a bark of relief. Bring them on and tell them they can skip the deodorant. See you soon, Marlowe, Zed replied, cutting the transmission with a crackle. Finn turned back to the students who were watching him with a mix of confusion and hope. That, my young rebels, Finn declared, was the sound of help arriving. And not just any help, Zed's help. Which means we've got a fighting chance, or at least someone else to blame when this all goes south. The students shared a look, their expressions shifting from uncertainty to something resembling cautious optimism. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't completely screwed after all. All right, Finn continued, rubbing his hands together as if warming up for a particularly challenging lecture. Let's see if we can't convince the rest of the city to join our little revolution. But how are we gonna do that? Chartreuse asked, crossing her arms as she stared at Finn with a mix of skepticism and expectation. Well, Finn drawled, scratching his chin thoughtfully, we could try the old-fashioned way, lying, cheating, and the promise of free snacks. Hours later, they'd managed to rig up a more stable communication line. It wasn't pretty, more duct tape than tech at this point, but it worked. The students had dispersed through the asteroid's dim corridors, whispering to anyone who'd listen. The message was simple. The mercenaries were here to take over, and Finn and his ragtag band were the best chance to stop them. "Finn, you got less of a plan than a moth flying into a flame," Zed commented as he and his crew disembarked from their battered ship, all ready for a fight. They looked like they'd been pulled from a wanted board, rough, scrappy, and about as trustworthy as a 3-credit hover car. Perfect for the job. "That's why I'm glad you showed up," Finn replied, grinning as he clapped Zed on the shoulder. "Keep telling him that and I'll never have to pay for drinks again." Zed snorted and gestured to his crew. "All right, folks," he called, his voice carrying a tone of authority and chaos. "We're here to make friends and influence people. And by that, I mean get these folks on our side before the mercs squash us like bugs." The crew fanned out, taking to their task with grim cheer. Finn watched as they mingled with the asteroid's beleaguered inhabitants, spreading the word about the mercenary threat and Finn's supposed brilliance, an idea he found as absurd as it was necessary. As the tide began to shift, the asteroid buzzed with a new energy, the kind that comes from realizing you've got nothing left to lose but your chains, or in this case, your rock. The ragtag coalition grew, bolstered by former rivals, reluctant allies, and the kind of outcasts who had nowhere else to go. "We might just pull this off," Finn muttered to himself, marveling at the motley crew forming around him. "Or at least go down in a blaze of slightly competent glory." "Don't get too cocky," Zed advised, materializing at Finn's side like a sarcastic ghost. "We've still got a long way to go before this becomes anything resembling a victory." "I'm aware," Finn replied, his tone dry as a barren asteroid. "But right now, I'll take whatever semblance of success I can get." As the makeshift resistance grew, Finn found himself at the center of a storm, not the kind that shreds everything in its path, but the kind that brings change whether you're ready or not. "You ever think about just giving up and getting a proper job?" Zed asked, his tone teasing yet thoughtful. "Once or twice," Finn admitted, glancing around at the chaos they'd wrought. "But then I remember how much I hate nectas and meetings, and the fact that teaching children to question authority apparently leads to gunfights on asteroids." Zed laughed, a sound like gravel rolling downhill. "You're one hell of a teacher, Marlowe. More importantly, you're one hell of a pain in the ass to the right people." "Thanks," Finn replied, his grin as crooked as his moral compass. "I do try." With newfound allies at their side, Finn and his students faced the coming battle with the kind of reckless determination only the utterly desperate possess. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. But what they lacked in resources, they made up for in sheer stubbornness and a devil-may-care attitude. "All right, everyone," Finn called out as the mercenaries regrouped for another assault. "It's time to teach these bastards the first rule of surviving the impossible. Never underestimate the power of people with nothing left to lose." His words were met with cheers, ragged, defiant, and tinged with the kind of optimism that comes from having nowhere else to go but forward. As the mercenaries advanced, Finn and his allies stood their ground, ready to fight with everything they had. They might not win, but they'd make damn sure the mercenaries remembered the day they picked a fight with a bunch of misfit toys and their half-crazed leader. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to win after all. "So, Finn," Zed said, standing shoulder to shoulder with him as the enemy closed in, "what's your plan if we survive this mess?" "Honestly," Finn replied, his eyes glinting with mischief, "I'm thinking a vacation, preferably somewhere without mercenaries, space battles, or angry bureaucrats." "Sounds like a dream," Zed replied, his laughter lost amidst the roar of engines and the crackle of energy weapons. "Dreaming's all we've got," Finn said, raising his voice to be heard over the din. "So let's make it a good one." As the battle raged on, Finn and his ragtag crew fought with everything they had, their resolve as unyielding as the rock beneath their feet. And though the outcome remained uncertain, one thing was clear: whatever happened next, they'd face it together. Because in the end, that's what mattered: finding something worth fighting for and holding on to it with everything you've got, even if it was just the hope of seeing another day. Finn stood at the edge of the makeshift barricade, armed with a laser pointer that was more classroom accessory than weapon. In the distance, the mercenaries were regrouping, their ships like vultures circling the dying carcass of a long-dead civilization. The mercenaries were a rough bunch, with Captain Virax leading them, a man with a face that could make a gargoyle jealous. Finn grinned at the thought. "All right, kids," he said, turning to his students, scrappy, bright-eyed, and probably regretting every life choice that led them to this moment. "Today's lesson is on guerrilla tactics and how not to die horribly." Chartreuse was at his side, arms crossed, her skepticism so palpable you could use it as a shield. "Are you sure this is going to work, Finn?" "Sure," Finn laughed. "In the way that I'm sure the sun will rise tomorrow, or that someone somewhere is always out of coffee." Next to her, Zed was inspecting a suspiciously sticky-looking rifle. "Your curriculum's gotten a lot more interesting since I last checked in," he said, flashing a grin that was all teeth and trouble. "Desperation's the mother of invention," Finn replied. "And we're about to invent a whole new kind of chaos." "Or die trying," Zed snorted, slapping a battery into the rifle. Finn turned back to his students, their expressions a cocktail of fear, excitement, and the kind of reckless energy only teenagers and people who should know better can muster. "Remember, folks, the mercenaries might have numbers, but we have the one thing they don't: common sense," one of the students asked, managing to sound both hopeful and sarcastic. "No, we've got that too," Finn admitted. "But I was thinking more along the lines of sheer, bloody-minded determination." The students smirked, some visibly relaxing at the levity. Finn knew they were scared, hell, so was he. But fear had a way of sharpening the senses, and they were going to need every edge they could get. With a plan that was more pipe dream than strategy, they moved out, slipping through the asteroid's shadowy corridors like ghosts. The city, such as it was, had rallied behind them, a motley collection of the disillusioned, the desperate, and those who'd simply run out of ways to say no. Captain Virax, oblivious to the mutiny brewing under his nose, was busy barking orders at his men, trying to maintain the facade of control. Finn watched him from a distance, nestled behind a stack of crates that served as both cover and a reminder that sometimes the universe had a sense of humor. "You see that guy over there?" Finn whispered to Chartreuse, gesturing to Virax. "He's got a face like a bulldog chewing a wasp." Chartreuse snorted, drawing a glare from a passing mercenary. "If looks could kill, right?" "Unfortunately, his gun actually can," Finn replied, slowly inching back into the shadows. "All the more reason to stick to the plan and hope our luck holds." In the makeshift control room, once a classroom that had seen better days, Zed and his crew were busy coordinating the defense. The air was thick with tension, but also with a strange, bracing sense of possibility. "All right, people," Zed called out, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen far too many close calls. "Remember, the goal is to get them running with their tails between their legs, not that we wouldn't mind a few more bruises on their side." The room echoed with grim chuckles, the kind that came from shared anxiety and gallows humor. Finn took it all in, a small smile tugging at his lips despite the odds. It was good to have friends, even if they were questionably sane and decidedly unwashed. As the mercenaries advanced, spreading out through the corridors, the students and Zed's crew engaged in a hit-and-run strategy, striking fast and fading into the gloom. Finn watched, impressed despite himself, at how quickly they'd adapted to this new form of learning. "See, that's what happens when you make education interesting," he muttered, ducking behind cover as a volley of laser fire scorched the air where his head had been moments before. "You've definitely got a unique teaching style," Zed remarked, taking cover beside him, a mischievous glint in his eyes. I might even say inspiring if it wasn't so likely to get us all killed. High praise, Finn replied, his grin as sharp as a knife. But I'll take what I can get. The battle raged on, a cacophony of explosions, shouts, and the unsettling hum of energy weapons. Finn could feel the adrenaline thrumming through his veins, a heady mix of fear and exhilaration. They were holding their own, but the tide could turn at any moment. In the midst of it all, Captain Virac stood like an unyielding monument to bad decisions, barking orders and trying to regain control. It was clear that he hadn't planned on facing such tenacity, and Finn couldn't help but revel in the sight. "Looks like the good captain's losing his composure," Zed observed, leaning against a wall that seemed to be held together by stubbornness and hope. "Seems he's not used to playing defense," Finn replied, peering around a corner. "And we're going to keep it that way." As the minutes ticked by, the tide slowly turned in their favor. The mercenaries, unused to such fierce resistance, began to falter, their ranks thinning amidst the chaos. It was then that Finn knew they had a chance, not a guarantee, but a fighting chance all the same. "All right, everyone," Finn shouted, his voice hoarse but determined. "Push them back. Make them regret ever setting foot on our rock." The response was immediate, a surge of movement as the students and their allies charged forward, forcing the mercenaries into retreat. Finn watched, pride swelling in his chest, as his ragtag band of rebels fought with everything they had, their spirits unbroken despite the odds. In the final moments of the battle, as the mercenaries scrambled onto their ships, Finn found himself face to face with Captain Virac. The man was as imposing as ever, his eyes cold and calculating. "Thought you could outsmart me, teacher," Virac sneered, leveling his weapon at Finn. "You'll find I'm not so easily bested." "Maybe," Finn conceded, his heart pounding in his chest. "But I've got one thing you don't." "And what's that?" Virac asked, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. "Friends," Finn replied simply, just as Zed appeared from the shadows, knocking the weapon from Virac's hand with a swift, practiced motion. The captain reeled, caught off guard by the sudden assault. Finn wasted no time, stepping forward to deliver a punch that sent the mercenary leader sprawling to the ground. As Virac lay there, groaning amidst the dust and debris, Finn couldn't help but chuckle. "Looks like you just got schooled." With the mercenaries in full retreat, Finn and his allies regrouped, the adrenaline slowly giving way to a sense of disbelief and triumph. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. "Well, I'll be damned," Zed said, clapping Finn on the back with enough force to almost knock him over. "You crazy bastard, you pulled it off." Finn grinned, his mind still whirring with the improbability of their victory. "Guess that means I can finally take that vacation." "Don't get too ahead of yourself," Zed replied, his tone somewhere between fond and exasperated. "There's still a lot to clean up." "Cleaning up's never been my strong suit," Finn admitted, looking around at the smiling, exhausted faces of his students and allies. "But I suppose I can make an exception, just this once." As the dust settled, the asteroid's inhabitants emerged, a mix of relief and disbelief etched across their features. They'd survived against all odds, and the future, uncertain as it was, seemed a little brighter. Finn watched them, his heart swelling with a sense of fulfillment he'd never quite managed to find in the classroom. This, he realized, was why he did what he did. Not for the glory or the accolades, but for the chance to make a difference, however small, in a universe that often seemed indifferent at best. "So what's next for the infamous Finn Marlowe?" Chartreuse asked, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "Next," Finn repeated, pretending to ponder. "Well, I hear the asteroid belt's lovely this time of year." Chartreuse rolled her eyes, but there was a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "Always the comedian." "Someone's got to keep things light," Finn replied, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "And after all this, I think I've earned a little comedy." With their victory secured, Finn and his motley crew turned their attention to the future, ready to face whatever came next with the same irreverence and determination that had seen them through the battle. And as they did, Finn couldn't help but feel a spark of hope amidst the darkness, a reminder that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys could win. even in a universe as grim and uncaring as this one. The dust had barely settled since the mercenaries tucked tail and ran, but the asteroid was already humming with the sound of reconstruction. Nothing like a brush with death to get the blood and the hammers pumping. Finn watched from the sidelines, leaning against a wall that seemed one good cough away from collapsing, and marveled at how quickly chaos could turn into productivity when people were motivated. "Look at them go," Zed said, sidling up next to him and gesturing at the makeshift crews cobbling together barricades, patching up holes, and generally trying to make their ramshackle home a little less ramshackle. "There's nothing like a bit of existential terror to get folks off their asses," Finn replied, a sardonic grin plastered across his face. "Fear's a hell of a motivator. You should put that in your next lesson plan," Zed said, his grin as crooked as his aim with a rifle. Terra 101, How to Get Shit Done. Finn chuckled, watching as his students, those wide-eyed aliens who'd once thought of him as just another human oddity, took charge. They were delegating tasks, organizing supplies, and most importantly, not blowing themselves up. It was almost enough to give him hope. Almost. "Look at them," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Actually taking the lead." "I might have accidentally done something right." Chartreuse appeared on his other side, arms crossed and eyebrows raised. "Accidentally?" "Well, yeah," Finn said, scratching the back of his neck sheepishly. "I mean, I didn't exactly plan on turning a bunch of alien teenagers into revolutionaries." Chartreuse shook her head, a smirk playing at her lips. "You really do have a talent for chaos." "A gift and a curse," Finn agreed, shrugging. "Mostly a curse if we're being honest." As the asteroid's inhabitants went about their business, Finn couldn't help but notice how things had changed. There was a sense of purpose, of community that hadn't been there before. People, aliens, humans, and everything in between were talking, laughing, and working together in ways they hadn't before the mercenaries came knocking. "Feels a bit like a miracle, doesn't it?" Zed mused, watching a group of aliens use a combination of teamwork and physics-defying technology to lift an impossibly heavy girder into place. All it took was a bit of bloodshed and a shared enemy. "Who knew? Yeah, funny how that works," Finn replied, staring out at the bustling scene. "Guess all it took was a common goal and a few near-death experiences to bring everyone together." "Sounds like a recipe for success," Chartreuse remarked dryly. "Really should bottle that up and sell it. Could probably make a fortune," Finn said. "Or end up dead broke and slightly deader." Zed clapped him on the back, a gesture that was both encouraging and slightly painful. "Never change, Finn." As the day wore on, Finn wandered the asteroid's corridors, taking in the oddly heartening sight of cooperation and determination. It was like watching a particularly dysfunctional family finally getting their act together for the common good. Or at least not actively trying to kill each other. His students were the biggest surprise of all. The once rowdy bunch of aliens were now the de facto leaders of this ragtag community. Finn watched as they coordinated efforts, addressed grievances, and even managed to crack a few jokes along the way. It was almost like they'd been paying attention in his classes, despite all the evidence to the contrary. "See, Finn. They learned something from you," Chartreuse said, sidling up next to him as he watched one of his more rebellious students, a tentacled alien named Quill, negotiate a dispute over food rations. "Didn't think it was possible," Finn admitted, his voice tinged with disbelief. "But here we are." "Think they'll make it?" she asked, her tone more curious than skeptical. "They've got a fighting chance," Finn replied, folding his arms over his chest. "And sometimes that's all you need." Chartreuse nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. "So what's next for you, teacher?" "Next," Finn repeated, as if the concept was foreign to him. "Well, I've had my fill of gunfights and insurrections for a while. Maybe I'll get back to what I do best. Ruining young minds," she teased, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "Exactly," Finn said with mock seriousness. "The galaxy ain't gonna corrupt itself." As he wandered back to the makeshift control room, formerly his classroom, Finn pondered the strange course his life had taken. He'd come to this rock of an asteroid as just another cog in the bureaucratic machine, a teacher living paycheck to paycheck, trying to make sense of a universe that seemed hell-bent on defying logic. Now he was something more, a reluctant leader, an accidental hero, a teacher who'd actually made a difference. Funny how life turns out, he muttered to himself, settling into an old, creaky chair that groaned under his weight. One minute you're teaching calculus to kids who'd rather be anywhere else. The next you're leading a revolution against a bunch of heavily armed mercenaries. The comm system crackled to life, interrupting his introspection with a burst of static. It was Necktie Man, the head bureaucrat, his voice as shrill and disapproving as ever. "Mr. Marlowe, this is highly irregular. Your actions have caused quite the stir at headquarters." Finn rolled his eyes, not surprised in the least. "Oh, you noticed. Thought I might have flown under the radar on this one." "Your sarcasm is not appreciated," Necktie Man snapped. "There are protocols, Mr. Marlowe." "Procedures? Yeah, well, I must have missed the memo," Finn replied, his tone as dry as the asteroid's surface. "Things got a bit hectic. Hectic or not, your actions have consequences," the bureaucrat continued, his voice crackling with indignation. "There's talk of an inquiry." Finn couldn't help but chuckle at the bureaucrat's predictability. "Let me save you the trouble. I did what I had to do to keep the students and this asteroid safe. If that ruffles a few feathers, so be it." "You've caused quite the political headache," Necktie Man said, exasperation seeping through the static. "Just doing my civic duty," Finn replied, smirking at the comm system. "Consider it a learning experience for all involved." Necktie Man sighed, the sound like a deflating balloon. "I suppose there's little we can do now. Just try to keep things under control, will you?" "I'll do my best," Finn promised, though he suspected his definition of control might differ slightly from the bureaucrats. As the comm system fell silent, Finn leaned back in his chair and surveyed the room. The transparent board was still covered in hastily scribbled plans and diagrams, a testament to the chaos that had unfolded. He felt an odd sense of accomplishment, knowing that his unorthodox methods had actually worked, that he'd made a difference in a place that had all but given up hope. "Guess I taught them more than just math," he mused, a wry smile tugging at his lips. The door creaked open and Zed stuck his head inside, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Just heard from our bureaucratic friend." "Yeah," Finn said, nodding toward the comm system. "Seems I've caused quite the stir." "You're becoming a legend," Zed said, clearly enjoying the idea. "Or a cautionary tale," Finn countered, though he couldn't help but feel a little proud. Zed chuckled, stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind him. "So, what's next on the agenda? More guerrilla warfare lessons, or are we moving on to advanced political subversion?" "Neither," Finn said, shaking his head. "I think it's time we focused on rebuilding and making this place livable again. No more mercenaries, no more bureaucrats breathing down our necks. Just life." Zed raised an eyebrow. "That almost sounds optimistic." "Don't let it get around," Finn said, his tone mock serious. "I've got a reputation to uphold." As the asteroid's inhabitants worked tirelessly to rebuild their home, Finn found himself wandering the corridors, offering advice, lending a hand, and occasionally delivering the odd pep talk. It was a strange feeling, being the one people looked to for guidance, but he found he didn't mind it as much as he thought he would. The city was transforming before his eyes, and although it was a long way from perfect, it was growing, evolving, and finding its footing in a universe that had never given it much of a chance. And Finn, for all his irreverence and cynicism, had played a part in that transformation. As the days turned to weeks, the asteroid began to take on a new life. The makeshift barricades were replaced with proper defenses. The corridors were lit by more than just flickering emergency lights, and the people, the aliens, the humans, the hybrids, all found a place to belong. And Finn, for the first time in a long time, felt like he belonged too. "Hey, Finn," Chartreuse called out, interrupting his thoughts as he stood on a makeshift balcony overlooking the bustling city. "Got a second?" For you always, he replied, turning to face her with a grin. She joined him at the railing, her gaze sweeping across the scene below. It's something, isn't it? Yeah, Finn said, nodding in agreement. Almost feels like a real city now. You know, you've made quite the impact here, Chartreuse said, her tone earnest. People are actually looking up to you. Terrifying thought, Finn said, though he couldn't help but feel a little pleased. Maybe, she said, elbowing him playfully. But it's true. As they stood there, watching the city they'd both helped to save, Finn felt a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and sometimes that was enough. So what's the plan now? Chartreuse asked, glancing at him with curiosity. Honestly, no idea, Finn admitted, leaning against the railing. But that's half the fun, isn't it? Never a dull moment with you, she said, shaking her head with a smile. Nah, Finn agreed, returning her smile with one of his own. And let's keep it that way. As the sun, or whatever passed for it on this rock, began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, Finn couldn't help but feel hopeful for the future. They'd faced down danger, defied the odds, and come out stronger for it. And for a teacher who'd stumbled into heroism by accident, that was more than enough. The universe might be a grim, uncaring place, but here, on this asteroid, they'd carved out a little corner of it where hope could flourish. And that, Finn thought, was something worth fighting for.